Today we're going to talk about the types of error. Something is statistically significant when you have evidence to reject the null and have evidence of the alternative. Another way to say this is, I have evidence of a greater ability. We have ruled out random chance for an unusual performance. The smaller the p-value, the stronger the evidence we have to support the alternative and to rule out random chance. Significance level is a level of evidence that is required to rule out random chance. To reject the null and support the alternative, the p-value must be less than the significance level. If the significance level is 5%, then the p-value must be less than 5% to reject the null and support the alternative. Likewise, if the significance level is 2%, then the p-value must be less than 2% to reject the null. We always compare our p-value to the value of significance, but the way we make our conclusion does not change. Let's do an example. Make a conclusion at a 1% significance level. If the p-value is 0.005, the p-value is less than 1%. This means that the random chance is not a plausible explanation. Therefore, we reject the null and have evidence of the alternative. If the p-value is 0.03, the p-value is greater than 1%. This means that random chance is plausible and we fail to reject the null and have evidence of the null. When the null is true and we fail to reject it, that means that we've come to the right decision. When the null is false and we reject the null, we've come to the right decision. But we're going to talk about the cases in which we were not correct. So when the null is true, but we reject the null, we get an error. And when the null is false and we fail to reject the null, we get an error. A type 1 error occurs when we reject the null and support the alternative hypothesis, when in reality, the null is true. For example, the defendant is on trial for a crime. The null would be the defendant is innocent, and the alternative is the defendant is guilty. For a type 1 error, we reject the null and support alternative. So we are saying that the defendant is guilty when they are actually innocent. Or the defendant is innocent and we find them guilty. To reduce type 1 error, we lower the significance level. The lower the significance level, the stronger evidence we need to reject the null. A type 2 error occurs when we reject the alternative and support the null, hypothesis. In reality, the alternative is true. So again, the defendant is innocent is the null, and the defendant is guilty is the alternative. The type 2 error would be when we reject the alternative and support the null. So the defendant is guilty, but was found innocent. To reduce type 2 error, you increase the sample size. Type 2 errors are most likely to happen when the number of performances is small, so an unusual performance happened by random chance in a small sample. The smaller the sample size, the more likely to reject the alternative and have evidence of the null. The larger the sample size, the more likely to reject the null and have evidence of the alternative. How does this relate to the law of large numbers? Well, the larger the sample size, the closer you get to the population. So personally, I have been playing this game, Among Us, a lot. And let's talk about Among Us. Among Us is a game where you have crewmates and imposters. The crewmates are tasked to do all of their tasks before the imposter can kill everybody off and win the game. You are able to vote people off to see, if you think they are an imposter. So when, let's say that the null is a person is a crewmate and the alternative is a person is an imposter. If the person is a crewmate and you think that they're the crewmate, you're not going to reject them. When the person is an imposter and you know they're the imposter and not a crewmate, you eject them and remove them from the game. Now, the errors that come from this are when the person is a crewmate, but you thought they were an imposter. So you vote them out, but they're not an imposter. And then the other error, so type 2 error, would be if the person is an imposter, but you fail to get rid of them because you thought they were a crewmate, so the imposters win.